To figure out if the Vikings should take Kentucky quarterback Will Levis in the first round of the NFL draft, first we kind of have to ask, what are we really doing here? And what is the value of a quarterback? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also find the show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Today on the show, let's talk about Will Levis. We kind of did this with Anthony Richardson earlier in the week, and let's do the same thing with Will Levis. The operative question is, should the Vikings aim to replace Kirk Cousins with Will Levis in the long and or short term? To get into that conversation about like the value of ousting Kirk Cousins and then getting your cap space back, but you also have to spend a first round pick and maybe more depending on where you think Levis goes in the draft. That whole talking point is a very interesting one, right? The whole QB on a rookie contract thing. But to get into it, we have to first understand exactly who we're talking about, because you don't replace Kirk Cousins with generic quarterback number 329. You replace him with Will Levis or with Anthony Richardson in the other episode. But we have to understand who we're replacing him with, right? So let's look at Will Levis. I would love to do this with CJ Stroud and Bryce Young and stuff. Maybe will. Seems like Bryce Young's stock may be dropping a little bit because everybody's realizing that he's a small guy. But for now, Will Levis seems like he'll be very much in reach. At least in terms of like a trade up or something. So let's evaluate him first, and then we'll get into all the value stuff at the end. And I think with Will Levis, the point of having Will Levis as your quarterback is I just put it down in my notes, Bombas. The Bombas. He has an absolute bazooka of an arm, and every game he's good for one or two 55, 60-yard howitzer passes that are like perfectly on target, and they're absolutely insane. I mean, these are like Josh Allen nukes, and you're not going to see him, you're not going to hit him every time, but he hits them often enough that like, okay, this is a unique thing about Will Levis that's kind of, if you're drafting him, the point is that he can hit these absolute, take the whole lid off the whole thing, blow the lid off type of passes, right? But that's not really the point, like the bread and butter of his game. The bread and butter of his game at Kentucky was quick game. And this was very much a Kentucky thing. That offensive coordinator, Rich Scarganello or whatever his name is, was very quick. It was very dink and dunk, and it was all about executing quickly and precisely. And Will Levis did that very, very well. But he is a very like in rhythm, quick game kind of guy. It was 3-step drop, set, throw a slant, 3-step drop, set, throw a stick, 3-step drop, set, throw a basic over the middle or whatever. He's really well built for that because the mechanics and the just like the rhythm of it was very rehearsed, very precise, very polished. It looked there are all kinds of plays on that tape where I was like, boom, okay, that's an NFL play right there. That is an NFL 2nd and 5 kind of stick route, dragon route kind of play, mesh, what have you. But it was all the simple kind of in rhythm stuff. And it was kind of how they decided they were going to try to stress defenses, was by being very precise and being very, very fast from whistle to whistle. And just, you have a 1.5 seconds to get to me. You're never going, and they had a terrible offensive line and they had really good after catch weapons. And this is kind of why they did that. Because it would kind of neutralize any pressure. If you were going to kick my tackle's butt all day, it doesn't matter because the ball's out really fast. And, we've got guys that can make your guys miss in space. So let's do that. Right. So they got all these explosives off of, 3-yard plays. And so Levis kind of played point guard. But that kind of obscures his tape, because you can't judge him based on just that. They were doing that because of offensive personnel stuff that has nothing to do with you. If you draft Will Levis, that's not going to translate to you necessarily. So instead, you kind of got to look at some 2021 tape as well, which just a thing to be aware of if you're going to go on your own and watch Will Levis. Don't just watch 2022, where normally I would probably be all right with that. It's his senior year, right? This is going to be the closest thing to what you get in the NFL, so focus on that. But for Levis, that offense just obscured a lot of the skill set that he does or does not have. It actually papered over some issues for him as well that then show up more in the 2021 tape. But the one thing the next thing I guess I love about Levis is he has a lightning quick release. And that's why this quick game thing really worked for him. Really good rhythm, really good mechanics, and a lightning fast release. Like from, trigger to balls out is really tight and fast. There's a great Josh McCown video with Josh Norris at Underdog Fantasy that he goes over all of the quarterbacks. I really like that series. But it was like the first thing Josh McCown pointed out was like, there's no wasted motion. There's no extra hitches. There's no extra, double clutching. There's no head movements or shoulder movements or your other arm. There's no flailing, nothing like that. You watch Anthony Richardson throw, and sometimes there's extra crap in there that can throw the ball off and cause some of the ball placement issues that he's known for. With Levis, it's very tight and it's very consistent. And while we're on the note of positive things, he also has a little bit of a run threat. Kentucky did some read option stuff, some quarterback sweep, kind of sprint right stuff, a lot of moving pockets. There was definitely an element of mobility to his game. It was nothing like Bryce Young. It wasn't like some of these other guys that came out. It's not like Anthony Richardson, who is housing things from 80 yards and doing crazy Cam Newton stuff. But it was certainly there and something that you can utilize, which will aid you in your run game. If you can kind of have the quarterback even just be a little bit of a threat, you can change the way that they fit and take advantage of that. Now, with this whole quick game thing, because the point was to rhythmically kind of get the ball out, RPO, or just like quick rhythm pass, it was kind of one read and throw. And if that read wasn't there, usually by then he was just like sacked, so it didn't matter. Or, it was kind of, and by one read, I don't necessarily mean there's one route. And if that route doesn't get open, one read, quote unquote, can mean, hey, you're reading the cornerback. And if he, stays flat, throw deep. And if he goes deep, throw flat. But it was usually like there was kind of one thing, and it was oftentimes he would just rip it, right? Because it was all rhythm and it was all very close, and it relied a lot on your pre-snap read. So he would come in and look pre-snap, and there was a lot of adjusting and moving around and a lot of activity before the snap, which is a good thing, right? You want your quarterback to be capable of that. But what it kind of led to is a lot of first read habits with Levis. And you saw this especially in the 2021 tape. So maybe he's gotten better at this and Kentucky just didn't showcase it. But I didn't see enough of progressing off something that wasn't there. If something, it was either there and he ripped it, it wasn't there and he would just rip it anyways and throw an incompletion. He would then just kind of default to hucking it up like you would in Madden. He'd say, all right, the dig isn't there. I'm just going to throw this go ball out to the sideline and maybe I get a crazy explosive play or something. Or he would kind of do one read, then check down, which isn't the worst thing because he would get to that check down quickly. And for NFL coaches, they'll feel like, oh, okay, I can work with that. But too often it would be, if that read wasn't there, he would wait and wait and wait for it to come open. So if it was, like a special or like a long curl route, or there's one rep that really bugged me that was a deep basic or a deep kind of in-breaking route, and the corner was playing him with inside leverage. This was versus, I think the corner was actually Caleb Evans. It was 2021. So the corner was playing with inside leverage and the route was going to break inside. That means you're going to break directly into the corner. You're going to hit the corner. So it's not there. You see that inside leverage of the corner, and it very often he was reading receivers. Hey, is that guy open? Is there a defender around that guy? Because if not, I'm going to throw it to him, rather than reading defenders. And while he has really good anticipation, that's part of the rhythm stuff, that, especially against zone coverages, he was really, really good at, hey, that guy doesn't look open, but the space he's going to be in is open and I can throw to that space. But when it was against man coverage, and it was about, waiting to see if a guy was going to win his route, a lot of times you can throw with the same anticipation there if you're reading the D-back. And you're saying, okay, this is going to break in and the D-back has inside leverage. That ain't going to win. And I got to come off of it. But he wouldn't come off of it. He would freeze, and then that would invite pressure, or he would drop his eyes and scramble. But it very rarely was it, okay, that's not there. Let me look across the field to where the next thing is. And I think, so I feel fairly comfortable calling him a one-read quarterback. I mean, I don't love doing that. But to me, he seemed like too often a one-read quarterback. And I think the quick game Kentucky thing exacerbated that habit. And if I drafted Will Levis, I'd be really worried about, can I get him to do a full field, McVay style, all the way across right to left progression quickly? Or is he going to sit there and wait for the alert to come open and not like come off of it? So that's one thing that bugged me. There's actually a bunch of other stuff that bugged me, and I want to make sure that I have time to get into it. And then, of course, we also have to have the overall value conversation. But we're not done really deciding, okay, what is Will Levis worth? Because most of what I've said is pretty exciting. But first, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. Just because the NFL season is over doesn't mean Grambling is over, because the NBA is like halfway through its season. It's right in the thick of things. We are also about to get to March Madness, right? College basketball. Both sides of that bracket are starting to kind of pepper in, fill up. We know most of who's going to be in the tournament by now. So it is a great time to hop on to FanDuel. And if you're a new customer, you can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So go bet a college basketball game, and if you don't win, maybe you can get some bonus bets and use those on the actual 64-team tournament. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, which is safe, secure, and super easy to use, and then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. You can even stack them all together and do a same-game parlay, try to get some better winnings. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Patreon has been paused for February, but it is coming back in March with film reviews on all these draft prospects. Everybody I've talked about on the show so far, I have a film review ready to put up on Patreon too. So come and get it. Let's move on with Will Levis, though. So we kind of talked about how he's a little bit first ready. It's not terrible. There are definitely plays where you can see him kind of like progress through on the goal line, especially. I've seen a couple of those, which is nice. You really love to see that because everything condenses and is a lot faster on the goal line. But I didn't see it enough. I saw too many instances, is a better way, of him just holding on the first read when it was really obviously not going to come open, just like waiting for it to clear. And that is very stare down. He's a very stare down quarterback, like very young quarterback thing to do, where your eyes are just locked on something, and veteran safeties can follow your eyes to the ball. That's going to get you picked off a whole bunch. But let me talk mechanically as well. There are a couple mechanical things that bug me about Will Levis that lead to some ball placement issues at times where it absolutely is inexcusable to have them. Now, I will say, I think there are more issues with Will Levis's mechanics than Anthony Richardson, but Anthony Richardson's issue leads to more misses. So make of that what you will. It's like going to be a lot harder to fix, but also I think you can live with his ball placement and fix what you can with it, but it's not one of those things where it's so bad that it keeps him off the field until he fixes that, which is where I'm at with Richardson. And I just think that that's easy enough to fix that I still believe. But I think the worst accuracy thing that Will Levis does is that he drifts. When he's back in the pocket, you want to be on a very stable base. The best quarterbacks just stand there in the pocket. They don't bounce. They don't drift around. Their feet aren't happy. They're just standing there, calm, collected, easy base. And then when they're ready to throw, they can step into it. If you watch Cousins in the pocket, he will have his feet pointed toward whatever he is reading. And then when he comes off that read, he flips his feet and now he's pointed at whatever the next read is, and so on. With Levis, he's very bouncy, and that bouncy will make you kind of drift, and he won't reset his base to throw. He'll just throw off of that drift and that bounciness, and so he doesn't get that very good torque. And whenever he's drifting, the miss is to the direction he's drifting. Like you can tell, like, oh man, if you just weren't, it almost becomes like a fadeaway jumper where you're kind of throwing against your body's momentum. And you have to correct for that, and sometimes you'll overcorrect. But for Levis, he just kind of misses that direction. And similarly, he'll miss high because he jumps a lot when he throws. I don't know why he does that. He just jumps a lot, like a weird amount of the time. He jump throws like he's Tim Tebow, or to go back to the history doc, patreon.com/NFL, watch the history doc, Joe Cap, who famous mechanical catastrophe of a quarterback. Part of it was because he would jump throw every time, and he never threw accurate passes. They always found a way to find where they were getting to, but they were ducks and weird and wobbly. And Levis has that same habit. It's no longer 1969. You can't get away with that anymore. So I want him to get to his launch point in the pocket, and I just want to bolt his feet down. And I think that would help. And it's not unlike the problem that Anthony Richardson has as well. I think both of those guys are a little, I'm not going to say like pocket skittish, because it's not that implies like a pressure thing, but they're very twitchy in the pocket, and not in a good way. He also, sometimes he thinks he's Superman and he tries to sidearm it, and you're just not that guy, pal. Like, you're not that guy, pal. don't try to side. And every time he sidearms it, it like comes out exactly as far outside as he sidearmed. Like, just give me the consistent throwing motion that you have all the other plays. Every time you do a quick game, just throw every ball the same way. He's trying to do a little bit too much baseball pitcher weird crap. But like I said, because so much of his tape is on rhythm passing, and very rehearsed stuff, he's not doing any of the fancy things, and he doesn't have time to drift out of the way. He can hit all that stuff, and he can put a ton of zip on it. I mean, this dude's arm is a bazooka. The only other thing that I think merits talking about with him is, I wrote it down as like head empty stuff, but that's probably too mean. But I'm going to call it Ron Burgundy stuff, which, if you are a longtime listener, you will know that is something that I used to describe Kirk Cousins a lot, that he would kind of follow the script to a detriment. Even when the script was very clearly not going to work, he wasn't able to move off of it. And I'm not talking about freelance or abandoning the play call or anything like that. I'm talking about, hey, the coverage said that read was supposed to be there, but it isn't because your wide receiver fell down or whatever. You have to progress onward. And Levis is just too reticent to progress onward in his progression. Nobody is calling a play that's one read and run away, or one read and check down, unless it's like a super, super special shot play or something like that. Everything has another read, right? But he will freeze on it. There are a couple of really bad interceptions from this that you probably remember if you watched any Kentucky football on TV, and you're going, why is everybody talking about this quarterback? And he threw in multiple pick sixes on screens. And those are, in a sense, pre-snap read misses. When you've got like a smoke screen or a tunnel screen. There's one, it was a tunnel screen that he threw a pick six on. But the corner was in press coverage. Usually, and I'm not in the room, I don't know Kentucky's offense. Maybe Kentucky just didn't have something installed for him to check out of this. I would be stunned if a professional, or I guess call it semi-professional organization didn't have a check out of a tunnel screen when the corner was in press, because that cornerback is gonna pick the ball off. Like, he's right next to the receiver. You can't throw it to that guy. There's a dude there. But for whatever reason, he just sort of almost on autopilot followed the script. He took the pass, he lined himself up, he threw the tunnel screen, and the cornerback picked it off and took it back for a touchdown. It kind of, the autopilotiness of it, it's just sort of like he follows the instructions he gets, and when he runs out of instructions, then he usually will look to scramble, and sometimes it takes him so long to get to that point that he's already sacked. But a lot of times it's that he'll look to, he'll drop his eyes and he'll start running around, even though the play is still developing in front of him. So he's an eye dropper, and I don't love that. So all of that brings us to, we got to sum this guy up, and we have to sum him up in comparison to what we have now, right? Because we're not just choosing whether or not we want Will Levis. We're choosing, do we want Will Levis over Kirk Cousins? after factoring in the value considerations of contract and all of that stuff. So let's have that conversation. Is Will Levis at a cheaper deal worth it versus Kirk Cousins on his big old expensive deal? That's kind of the next part of this conversation. So you've heard this ad nauseum for basically since Kirk Cousins became a Viking. It is a disadvantage to pay your quarterback market rate because quarterbacks make so much money. And the best way to do it is to get a quarterback on a rookie deal that can take you to a Super Bowl so that you can you got the money to put a team around him, right? That's the logic. I think that's fairly reductive, right? Everybody's situation's a little different. Mitch Trubisky on a rookie contract ain't doing it for you, and Patrick Mahomes on a big contract's probably preferable to that. But with Will Levis, we have to kind of decide if Will Levis is worth it. Like the condition that has to be satisfied is Will Levis plus $30 million in cap space, we'll say. Will Levis plus $30 million in cap space is greater than Kirk Cousins. We have to satisfy that condition. And so to solve for that in that stupid little equation, we have to decide how is Will Levis compared to Kirk Cousins? Worse, right? And I don't think that surprises anybody that the conclusion that we have after we go through all this is Will Levis worse quarterback than Kirk Cousins. But what I see in Levis, even if you fix the kind of fixable things that are raw about his game, I see you kind of inheriting a lot of the same problems we have with Kirk Cousins. You have to kind of look, if your take is Kirk Cousins is just, he's only mid and he's never going to take us to a Super Bowl because he's good, not great, and it's always good, we're going to be stuck in its kind of top 10 range. Okay, what is the difference between Kirk Cousins and a great quarterback? And for me, this is less true in 2022. This is a little bit of an older take, but for me, for a long time, it was Ron Burgundy stuff. It was being a little bit too hesitant to come off of something. It was being unwilling to read a defensive back's leverage and instead kind of waiting for a guy to get open. Kirk Cousins was waiting to see something open rather than being anticipatory, even though he could be very anticipatory in other contexts, like against zone coverage and stuff. It was very similar weaknesses. So if that's what we're dealing with right now, and we draft Will Levis, what do we get? And I think really the only thing that Levis gives us that Kirk Cousins does not, because Cousins is accurate, he's very, very rhythmic, he's mechanically very sound. He gives us all of that. Getting Will Levis in the building doesn't really improve or anything on that stuff. If anything, Cousins is a 10-year vet. That's going to be a little more polished than a rookie, even one who's polished for a college quarterback. You're introducing the pocket drift stuff. You're introducing the bouncies. You're introducing weird sidearm things. You're introducing all this stuff. The only thing you really get with Levis is the bombas, the 55, 60-yard gigantic plays. Cousins has explosive play potential, but they're like 30, 40-yard plays, which is plenty good. And that's a great arm. But Will Levis's arm strength, I think, outdoes Kirk Cousins' arm strength, on the whole. So if you just want arm strength, okay, go Will Levis. Now, I think you'd be pretty naive to just want arm strength. But there you have it. So if you take Will Levis and put him in Kirk Cousins' position, it feels like we introduce a whole bunch of the same problems, a handful of new problems, and we turned 40-yard explosive plays into 60-yard explosive plays, which from an analytics perspective, an EPA perspective, once the play is explosive, whether it's 40 or 60 or 80 is really marginal. There's kind of a diminishing return because the real meat of value on EPA at least is getting the first down. And kind of once you've gotten that, it's really just field position. So you're, a few yards of field position twice a game. That feels very not worth it. So I feel very comfortable saying that Will Levis represents a decline in play from Kirk Cousins. Even if we fix some of the rawness stuff, I kind of feel like he still has, there's 6 or 7 things, right? And they're not going to just coach all of them out of him unless you're willing to wait by this guy for 10 years. But if he plays, like a worse Kirk Cousins for 10 years, aren't we stuck in the same purgatory? And doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose of the rookie contract? But I guess a way to pitch this would be, okay, what if Kirk Cousins was a little worse and a lot cheaper? Is that better? That's, I think, the logic that this has to be. And where I fall on that is that, okay, we can skimp at the QB position and get a lesser product for, I guess, lesser resources. But the thing is, because of where Will Levis is on the draft board, he's probably a first round quarterback. He's probably a first round quarterback you have to trade up for. So is he cheaper? We're not spending money, but we're spending crazy draft capital to get him. Two currencies, right? There's two different kinds of resource that teams spend: cap space and draft picks. So we're just spending one instead of the other a lot. And we're getting worse on the whole, with a chance to get a little better, but also a chance to just stay worse. And depending on how you feel about comparing draft picks to cap space, like how many millions of dollars you think a first round pick is worth or whatever, we might be spending more on this. So I guess I struggle to see any advantage outside of the explosives get a little longer. For that reason, I'm out on Will Levis unless he falls all the way to the second round and we can trade down. Then I feel a little bit better about it, because then you're getting, okay, I am spending a high pick on him, but I'm not spending all of that high pick on him, right? Because we managed to eke other value out of it by trading down. So he is in my trade down, top 40 kind of guy tier. He is a pro-ready quarterback. I really do think he's a day one quarterback, because he can at least run quick game, and you can run a fairly vanilla but an offense with him. Whereas some guys, when they come out, you can't run anything, right? And for that reason, I do think that he's going to go pretty. I'd be surprised if he made it past 20. I love him for a team like Carolina that has a lot of weapons, but is also sort of halfway rebuilding, and but just kind of needs something to hold down the fort, or somewhere like Houston where they just kind of need a guy to hold down the fort and be reasonable for a little while, stabilize the organization. And then maybe you get something better later if you can find a way to exploit the Bombas a little bit more with a speedy guy or something. I don't love him for where the Vikings are at, where they kind of already have that stabilizing presence. And if you're going to switch quarterbacks, it's because you're chasing something more than that. Will Levis just is not more than that. And so for that reason, I'm out on him as a Viking unless we can get him and extra capital by trading down. Then it becomes more of a value thing where you go, all right, yeah, he's not worth a whole first round pick, but what if we split that first round pick into 2 seconds? Okay, well, then we spend one of the seconds and then we get another second round guy. All right, Will Levis plus a second rounder, I could live with it. Maybe we do something like that. And at a certain point, you have to have made up the value that you're losing. But just slamming Will Levis at 23 or worse trading up, I would be pretty critical of. And I don't think that that's the best direction for the Vikings. I just don't see the advantage. Even trading down, ultimately, I think if you swap out Kirk Cousins for Will Levis, you get worse. So to do that, you need to get something in return. You need to get Will Levis plus stuff. And that stuff needs to make up the difference. I don't know if a second round pick is even enough to make up the difference. Maybe it's, you need to get a first next year or something like that and really get like a true amassing of assets. But I don't really see that as where the Vikings are at right now. They're not going to be doing like what the Titans are doing right now, what the Bears did last year. That's not where they're at. They would have behaved a lot differently if it were. So I'm out. I'm out on Will Levis, and I think that the idea of quarterback value kind of makes it so like it's too valuable a position to be the place that you skimp. And I think swapping to Will Levis, it's kind of like going with the generic brand toilet paper. There are just some things that you should probably splurge for the name brand on. How about that for something to end on? I'll talk to y'all tomorrow about, I don't know, maybe what's the Bijan, the running back? That's kind of who I feel like watching, but we'll see. Whatever happens. I'll talk to you tomorrow. FYI, I will be out Monday and Tuesday next week. I'll be out of town, and I will return Wednesday, but we still have one more show before I take that little break. So I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.